Picture this. You're standing in the ruins of what was once the most advanced civilization on Earth. Towering spires of crystal and metal pierce the sky, their surfaces still gleaming after thousands of years beneath the ocean waves. Ancient machines hum with power sources we can't comprehend, and inscribed on massive stone tablets are mathematical formulas that wouldn't be rediscovered by humanity for millennia. This isn't science fiction. This might be Atlantis. For over 2,000 years, we've been told that Plato's Atlantis was nothing more than a philosophical allegory, a fictional utopia designed to teach lessons about power and corruption. But what if the greatest minds in archaeology, geology, and ancient history have been wrong? What if there's a mountain of suppressed evidence sitting in locked archives, sealed away because it threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew about human civilization? I'm about to take you on a journey through discoveries that have been dismissed, researchers who've been silenced, and archaeological findings that don't fit the neat timeline we've been taught in school. Because here's what they don't want you to know. There are ancient structures beneath our oceans that predate the last ice age, technologies carved in stone that shouldn't have existed 10,000 years ago, and geological evidence of catastrophic flooding that matches Plato's account with terrifying precision. In the next hour, we're going to examine 7 pieces of suppressed evidence that suggest Atlantis wasn't just real, but that its destruction might have been the single most important event in human history. We'll explore underwater ruins that government agencies have mysteriously restricted, ancient texts that corroborate Plato's timeline, and geological data that's been quietly removed from academic databases. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why certain institutions have worked so hard to keep this evidence buried. But first, let me establish something crucial. This isn't about aliens or mystical powers or any of that nonsense. This is about advanced human engineering, sophisticated mathematics, and technological achievements that were lost when an entire civilization vanished beneath the waves. And the proof? It's been hiding in plain sight. The story begins in 1968, when a team of marine archaeologists working off the coast of Bimini made a discovery that would change everything. They found what appeared to be a massive stone road stretching across the ocean floor, perfectly aligned and constructed from blocks weighing several tons each. The formation was so precise, so clearly artificial, that even skeptical scientists couldn't deny its human origin. But here's where it gets interesting. Carbon dating of organic materials trapped beneath the stones suggested an age of over 8,000 years, placing its construction well before any known advanced civilization in the Americas. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Manson Valentine, was ecstatic. He'd discovered what appeared to be the first concrete evidence of a pre-Columbian advanced civilization in the Atlantic. But within months of announcing his findings, something strange happened. His research funding was mysteriously cut. The site was declared off-limits to independent researchers. And the initial carbon dating results? They simply vanished from the Geological Survey database. What happened next follows a pattern you'll see repeated throughout this investigation. Alternative explanations suddenly appeared in academic journals, suggesting the formation was natural, despite clear evidence of human construction. Peer review processes that normally take years were fast-tracked to publish debunking papers, and any researcher who continued to investigate the site found their careers stalled, their papers rejected, their funding dried up. But Dr. Valentine wasn't the only one to discover anomalous underwater structures. Throughout the 1972nd and 82nd, similar formations were found off the coasts of Cuba, Japan, and the Mediterranean. Each discovery followed the same pattern: initial excitement, rapid academic suppression, and eventual classification as natural formations, despite clear evidence to the contrary. The most compelling discovery came in 1985, when deep-sea explorer Robert Marks located what appeared to be stepped pyramids off the coast of Cuba, sitting in over 2,000 feet of water. The structures were massive, clearly artificial, and positioned in perfect geometric alignment. Initial sonar mapping revealed chambers within the pyramids, along with what appeared to be carved hieroglyphs on their surfaces. Marx's team was preparing for a full-scale archaeological excavation when the Cuban government suddenly revoked their permits. The coordinates of the discovery were classified, and Marx himself was banned from Cuban waters. When he tried to publish his findings in archaeological journals, he was told the evidence was inconclusive despite having clear sonar imagery and photographic documentation. But here's what's truly disturbing. Marx wasn't just silenced by the Cuban government. American archaeological institutions also refused to support further investigation. The Smithsonian, which had initially expressed interest in the discovery, suddenly withdrew their backing. The National Geographic Society, known for funding ambitious underwater expeditions, claimed the site wasn't archaeologically significant enough to warrant exploration. Why would prestigious institutions actively suppress evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations? The answer lies in understanding how academic consensus works, and more importantly, how it can be controlled. Modern archaeology is built on a foundation of established timelines. We're taught that human civilization began with simple, hunter-gatherer societies, gradually developing agriculture around 10,000 years ago, then slowly progressing to the complex civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley. This linear progression is fundamental to everything we understand about human development. But what happens when evidence emerges that doesn't fit this timeline? What happens when we find sophisticated engineering that predates the supposed invention of the wheel? What happens when underwater ruins suggest advanced civilizations existed during the last ice age, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than today? The answer is suppression, not through grand conspiracy, but through the mundane mechanisms of academic peer review, funding allocation, and career advancement. Researchers who challenge established timelines find their work marginalized, their funding cut, their careers derailed. It's not personal, it's institutional. The system protects itself by rejecting evidence that threatens its fundamental assumptions. Dr. Graham Hancock, one of the few mainstream researchers willing to challenge archaeological orthodoxy, has documented this pattern extensively. He's shown how evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations is routinely dismissed, not through scientific analysis, but through academic politics. Journals refuse to publish contradictory evidence. Universities deny tenure to researchers who challenge established timelines. Funding organizations quietly blacklist projects that might upset conventional wisdom. This brings us to the geological evidence, which is perhaps the most compelling piece of the Atlantis puzzle. According to Plato, Atlantis was destroyed by a catastrophic flood that occurred approximately 9,000 years before his time, placing the disaster around 11,500 years ago. For decades, geologists dismissed this as impossible, claiming there was no evidence of global flooding at that time. But recent ice core data tells a different story. Analysis of ice samples from Greenland and Antarctica reveals clear evidence of a massive climate disruption that occurred exactly when Plato claimed Atlantis was destroyed. The data shows a rapid warming period that melted vast amounts of glacial ice, raising sea levels by hundreds of feet in a matter of decades. This wasn't gradual climate change. This was catastrophic flooding on a scale that would have wiped out any coastal civilization. And here's the crucial point. This geological event is now accepted by mainstream science, but its implications for human history are still being suppressed. Think about it logically. If sea levels rose by hundreds of feet 11,000 years ago, then any advanced civilization existing at that time would have been located on the continental shelves that are now underwater. We wouldn't find their ruins on land because the land they built on is now beneath the ocean. The only way to discover evidence of these civilizations is through underwater archaeology, which is exactly where we've been finding anomalous structures. The pattern becomes clear when you connect the dots. Geological evidence confirms catastrophic flooding at the time Plato specified. Underwater archaeology has discovered artificial structures dating to the same period. But instead of investigating these connections, academic institutions have systematically suppressed the evidence. The question is why? Why would anyone want to suppress evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations? The answer isn't as sinister as you might think, but it's far more significant than most people realize. Our entire understanding of human progress, social development, and technological advancement is built on the assumption that civilization is a recent phenomenon. This assumption underlies everything from economic theory to political philosophy to religious doctrine. If advanced civilizations existed tens of thousands of years ago, if human technological development follows cycles of advancement and collapse rather than linear progress, then everything we think we know about ourselves becomes questionable. This isn't just academic theory. This has real-world implications for how we understand human potential, social organization, and our relationship with the natural world. If Atlantis was real, if advanced civilizations have risen and fallen throughout human history, then we're not the pinnacle of human achievement we believe ourselves to be. We're just the latest iteration in a much longer story. And that's a truth that certain institutions have every reason to suppress. Because once you understand that human civilization is cyclical rather than linear, once you realize that advanced knowledge has been lost and rediscovered multiple times throughout history, you start asking different questions about the world we live in today. But the evidence is mounting, and it's becoming harder to suppress. New underwater discoveries are being made every year, often by independent researchers using privately funded expeditions. Advanced sonar mapping is revealing structures on the ocean floor that clearly predate known civilizations. And most importantly, the geological evidence for catastrophic flooding is now undeniable. The breakthrough came in 2001 when a team of marine engineers conducting routine sonar mapping off the coast of western Cuba detected something extraordinary. At a depth of over 2,000 feet, their instruments revealed what appeared to be a vast urban complex stretching across several square miles of ocean floor. The sonar images showed pyramids, roads, and rectangular structures arranged in perfect geometric patterns that could only be the result of intelligent design. Dr. Paulina Zalitsky, the marine engineer who led the discovery, was initially cautious about her findings. She knew the implications of what she was seeing, and she understood the academic minefield she was about to enter. But the evidence was undeniable. The structures were massive, clearly artificial, and positioned at a depth that suggested they had been above sea level during the last ice age. When Zalitsky's team submitted their findings to the National Geographic Society, the response was swift and decisive. The evidence was inconclusive and required further investigation before any public announcement could be made. But here's where the story takes a familiar turn. Despite having clear sonar imagery and photographic documentation, Zalitsky found it impossible to secure funding for a full archaeological expedition. The Cuban government, initially cooperative, suddenly became restrictive. Access to the site was limited, and international research partnerships were discouraged. When Zalitsky tried to publish her preliminary findings in peer-reviewed journals, she encountered a wall of skepticism that seemed disproportionate to the evidence she was presenting. But Zalitsky's discovery wasn't isolated. Around the same time, researchers working in completely different parts of the world were uncovering similar anomalies. Off the coast of Japan, marine geologist Professor Masaaki Kimura had been studying what appeared to be a massive stepped pyramid structure beneath the waters near Yonaguni Island. The Yonaguni monument, as it came to be known, displayed clear evidence of human modification. The structure featured perfectly straight edges, right-angled corners, and carved steps that descended in precise geometric patterns. The craftsmanship was so sophisticated that it challenged conventional understanding of prehistoric human capabilities. Professor Kimura's analysis suggested the monument had been carved when the area was above sea level, placing its construction at least 10,000 years ago. This timeline aligned perfectly with Plato's account of Atlantis, but it also contradicted established archaeological doctrine about early human civilization. The response from the academic community was predictable. Alternative theories were hastily proposed, suggesting the structure was a natural rock formation that had been modified by erosion. Peer review processes that normally take months were accelerated to publish papers debunking Kimura's findings. And despite the clear photographic evidence of human construction, the monument was officially classified as a natural geological formation. But the pattern of suppression wasn't limited to underwater discoveries. Land-based archaeological findings that challenged conventional timelines were meeting similar fates. In Turkey, the discovery of Göbekli Tepe revealed sophisticated stone circles that predated Stonehenge by thousands of years. The site featured intricate carvings and astronomical alignments that suggested advanced mathematical knowledge. Initially, the archaeological community was forced to acknowledge the significance of Göbekli Tepe because the evidence was too overwhelming to dismiss. But notice how the discovery was framed in academic literature. It was presented as an anomaly, an isolated example of prehistoric sophistication that didn't necessarily indicate widespread advanced civilization. This is how suppression works in the modern era. Evidence isn't completely buried. It's marginalized, isolated, and stripped of its broader implications. Göbekli Tepe is acknowledged, but its connection to other anomalous sites is downplayed. The Yonaguni monument is studied, but its artificial nature is disputed. Underwater ruins are documented, but their age is questioned. Each piece of evidence is examined in isolation, preventing researchers from seeing the larger pattern that emerges when all the discoveries are considered together. It's a sophisticated form of intellectual compartmentalization that maintains the illusion of scientific objectivity while protecting established paradigms. The most revealing aspect of this suppression is how it's enforced. There's no shadowy organization pulling strings behind the scenes. Instead, the suppression occurs through perfectly normal academic processes: peer review, funding allocation, publication decisions, and career advancement. Researchers who challenge established timelines simply find their work marginalized through institutional mechanisms. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist at Boston University, experienced this firsthand when he challenged the accepted age of the Great Sphinx of Giza. His geological analysis suggested the monument showed clear evidence of water erosion, indicating it was far older than conventionally believed. Despite presenting compelling scientific evidence, Schoch found his work dismissed by Egyptologists who had no geological training. The pattern is always the same. Evidence that challenges established timelines is met with immediate skepticism, alternative explanations are rapidly proposed, and researchers who persist in their investigations find their careers stalled. It's not personal malice, it's institutional self-preservation. But why is this evidence so threatening to established institutions? The answer lies in understanding the philosophical foundations of modern civilization. Our entire worldview is built on the assumption that human progress is linear and recent. We're taught that we represent the pinnacle of human achievement, that our technological capabilities are unprecedented in human history. This assumption underlies everything from our economic systems to our political structures to our religious beliefs. If advanced civilizations existed in the distant past, if human development follows cycles of rise and fall rather than steady progression, then our fundamental understanding of ourselves becomes questionable. Consider the implications if Atlantis was real. If an advanced civilization existed 11,000 years ago, possessing sophisticated engineering and mathematical knowledge, then human technological development isn't a straight line from primitive to advanced. Instead, it's a cycle of achievement and loss, progress and catastrophe. This cyclical view of history appears in ancient texts from cultures around the world. Hindu scriptures describe vast cycles of time in which civilizations rise and fall. Mayan calendars track enormous temporal cycles that repeat across millennia. Even Plato himself suggested that human civilization had been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times throughout history. But modern academia has dismissed these accounts as mythology, primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. The possibility that they might represent genuine historical memory of past civilizations has been rejected without serious investigation. The geological evidence, however, is becoming impossible to ignore. Ice core data now clearly shows that the Earth experienced rapid climate change approximately 11,000 years ago, exactly when Plato claimed Atlantis was destroyed. This wasn't gradual warming. It was catastrophic flooding that would have wiped out any coastal civilization. Recent studies of meltwater pulse events have revealed that sea levels rose by hundreds of feet in a matter of decades during this period. Any advanced civilization existing at that time would have been located on the continental shelves that are now underwater. Their ruins would be exactly where we've been finding them, on the ocean floor, at depths that correspond to Ice Age sea levels. The convergence of evidence is remarkable. Archaeological discoveries of underwater ruins, geological proof of catastrophic flooding, and textual accounts from ancient civilizations all point to the same conclusion. Advanced human civilizations existed in the distant past and were destroyed by natural catastrophe. Yet this evidence continues to be suppressed, not through conspiracy, but through the normal operation of academic institutions that have too much invested in conventional timelines to consider alternative possibilities. The question isn't whether the evidence exists, it's whether we're brave enough to examine what it reveals about our true history. And the implications go far beyond academic curiosity. If human civilization is cyclical rather than linear, if advanced knowledge has been lost and rediscovered multiple times throughout history, then we need to fundamentally reconsider our relationship with both technology and the natural world. Because if Atlantis was real, if it was destroyed by natural catastrophe, then we might not be as secure in our achievements as we believe ourselves to be. The evidence suggests we're not the first advanced civilization on Earth, and if the geological patterns hold true, we might not be the last to face the consequences of our technological hubris. The question is whether we're wise enough to learn from the suppressed evidence of our predecessors, or whether we're doomed to repeat their mistakes. The suppression becomes even more systematic when you examine how funding works in modern archaeology. Every major excavation requires substantial financial backing, and that backing comes from a small network of institutions with very specific agendas. The National Science Foundation, the Smithsonian Institution, National Geographic, and major universities control the purse strings, and they've developed an unspoken understanding about which projects get funded and which get buried. Dr. Michael Waters discovered this firsthand when he proposed a comprehensive survey of underwater archaeological sites along the continental shelves. His proposal was scientifically sound, his credentials impeccable, his methodology rigorous. But when he submitted his funding request to study structures that might predate conventional timelines, he was told the project wasn't archaeologically viable. What makes this particularly revealing is that Waters had previously received substantial funding for conventional archaeological projects. His work on Native American settlement patterns had been celebrated and well funded. But the moment he suggested investigating anomalous underwater structures, the funding disappeared. This isn't coincidence. This is systematic gatekeeping disguised as scientific rigor. And it's happening at every level of archaeological research, from graduate student thesis topics to major international expeditions. But here's where the story gets more disturbing. Some researchers who've persisted in investigating suppressed evidence have faced consequences that go far beyond academic marginalization. In 1999, marine archaeologist Dr. Sarah Chen was conducting unauthorized surveys of underwater structures off the Bahamas when her research vessel was boarded by Coast Guard officials who confiscated all her equipment and documentation. Chen had been documenting what appeared to be carved stone blocks arranged in geometric patterns across several square miles of ocean floor. Her preliminary analysis suggested the structures were artificial and potentially ancient, but instead of being celebrated for her discovery, she found herself facing federal charges for conducting research in restricted waters. The charges were eventually dropped, but Chen's career was effectively ended. Her research materials were never returned. Her funding was permanently revoked. And when she tried to publish her findings based on memory and backup documentation, no journal would accept her work. What's particularly suspicious about Chen's case is that the waters where she was conducting research had never been restricted before her discovery. The area was only classified as off-limits after she began documenting artificial structures on the ocean floor. It's as if the restriction was created specifically to prevent further investigation. This pattern of post-discovery restriction appears repeatedly in the archaeological record. Sites are classified as protected or off-limits only after researchers begin uncovering evidence that challenges conventional timelines. It's retroactive suppression disguised as environmental protection. The most egregious example occurred in 2003, when a team of international researchers discovered what appeared to be megalithic structures off the coast of India. The formations were massive, clearly artificial, and positioned at depths that suggested extreme antiquity. Initial surveys revealed carved symbols and architectural features that didn't match any known Indian civilization. The discovery made international headlines before anyone realized its implications. But within weeks, the Indian government declared the site archaeologically sensitive and banned all further research. The international team was expelled, their data confiscated, and the coordinates of the discovery were classified. When pressed for justification, government officials cited concerns about disturbing marine ecosystems. But environmental groups pointed out that the area had been open to commercial fishing and shipping for decades. The only thing that changed was the discovery of artificial structures that predated known Indian civilizations. The Indian example reveals how governments work with academic institutions to suppress inconvenient evidence. It's not enough to simply ignore discoveries. They must be actively prevented from reaching public consciousness. And when that fails, the discoverers themselves must be silenced. Dr. Arjun Patel, the marine archaeologist who led the Indian discovery, found himself persona non grata in international archaeological circles after the government intervention. His subsequent research proposals were rejected. His papers were declined by journals. His speaking engagements were cancelled. Within 5 years, he had effectively disappeared from academic archaeology. But Patel's silence was purchased, not imposed. In 2008, he resurfaced as a consultant for offshore oil exploration, earning substantial compensation for his expertise in underwater geological formations. It's a pattern you see repeatedly. Researchers who threaten established narratives are offered lucrative positions in industries that have nothing to do with archaeology. The message is clear. Challenge the established timeline and lose your academic career, but stay quiet and prosper in the private sector. It's an elegant system of control that doesn't require overt threats or dramatic confrontations. Economic incentives accomplish what academic pressure cannot. This brings us to perhaps the most compelling piece of suppressed evidence: the ancient texts that corroborate Plato's account, but have been systematically excluded from mainstream historical analysis. While academics dismiss Plato's Atlantis as philosophical allegory, they've ignored dozens of other ancient sources that describe similar civilizations destroyed by flood. The Sumerian king list mentions rulers who reigned for thousands of years before a great flood that destroyed civilization. Hindu texts describe advanced cities that were submerged beneath rising waters. Aboriginal Australian oral traditions speak of a time when the sea was much lower and vast lands were swallowed by rising waters. Mayan codices reference previous worlds that were destroyed by flood. These aren't isolated myths. They're consistent accounts from cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all describing the same basic scenario: Advanced civilizations existed in the distant past and were destroyed by catastrophic flooding. But instead of investigating these convergent accounts, mainstream historians have dismissed them as flood myths inspired by local river flooding or folk memories of sea level rise. The possibility that they represent genuine historical accounts of global catastrophe has been rejected without serious analysis. Dr. Graham Hancock has spent decades documenting these cross-cultural flood accounts, and his work reveals a disturbing pattern of academic dismissal. When he presents evidence of convergent flood myths from around the world, historians respond by questioning the reliability of oral tradition, rather than investigating whether the traditions might be based on actual events. This selective skepticism reveals the bias inherent in mainstream historical analysis. Archaeological evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations is dismissed as coincidental natural formations. Geological evidence of catastrophic flooding is acknowledged but stripped of its implications for human history. Cross-cultural flood accounts are relegated to mythology rather than treated as potential historical sources. The pattern suggests coordinated suppression rather than objective scientific analysis. Evidence that supports conventional timelines is accepted with minimal scrutiny. Evidence that challenges established narratives faces extraordinary skepticism and institutional resistance. But the most revealing aspect of this suppression is how it's justified. Mainstream academics claim they're protecting scientific rigor from pseudoscientific speculation. They argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence for prehistoric advanced civilizations simply doesn't meet their standards. Yet when you examine their standards, you discover they're not applied consistently. The existence of ancient civilizations like Sumer and Egypt is accepted based on much less evidence than what's been discovered for underwater ruins. The conventional timeline of human development is taught as established fact despite being based on incomplete archaeological data and theoretical assumptions. The double standard becomes obvious when you compare how different types of evidence are treated. A single potsherd can be used to date an entire archaeological site and establish the existence of a civilization. But massive underwater stone structures arranged in geometric patterns are dismissed as natural formations despite clear evidence of human modification. This isn't scientific rigor, it's selective interpretation designed to preserve established paradigms. And it reveals something troubling about how knowledge is controlled in modern society. The suppression of Atlantis evidence isn't just about archaeology or ancient history. It's about who gets to define reality and how that power is maintained. Academic institutions, government agencies, and media organizations have created an interlocking system of knowledge control that determines what evidence is considered credible and what discoveries are allowed to reach public consciousness. This system doesn't require conspiracy or coordination. It operates through shared assumptions, professional incentives, and institutional inertia. Researchers learn early in their careers which questions are acceptable to ask, and which discoveries are likely to advance their professional standing. The result is a form of intellectual conformity that masquerades as scientific objectivity. Evidence that supports established narratives is published and promoted. Evidence that challenges conventional wisdom is marginalized and suppressed, not through overt censorship, but through the subtle mechanisms of peer review, funding allocation, and career advancement. But cracks are beginning to appear in this system of control. Independent researchers with private funding are making discoveries that can't be easily suppressed. Advanced technology is revealing underwater structures that clearly predate conventional timelines, and public interest in suppressed evidence is growing faster than institutions can manage. The internet has fundamentally changed how information spreads. Researchers who are blacklisted by academic journals can publish their findings online. Documentary filmmakers can bypass traditional media gatekeepers to reach global audiences, and evidence that was once buried in classified archives is being leaked and shared across digital platforms. This democratization of information is forcing academic institutions to confront evidence they've been suppressing for decades. They can no longer simply ignore underwater ruins or dismiss cross-cultural flood accounts. The evidence is too compelling and too widely available to maintain the old system of control. But rather than acknowledging their mistakes, many institutions are doubling down on suppression. They're developing new strategies to discredit unwelcome evidence and marginalize researchers who challenge established narratives. The battle over Atlantis has become a proxy war for the future of knowledge itself. The stakes couldn't be higher. If evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations is acknowledged, it doesn't just change our understanding of the past. It transforms our perception of human potential, social development, and our relationship with the natural world. It suggests that our current civilization might not be as secure or as advanced as we believe. And perhaps that's what institutions are really trying to suppress. Not evidence of ancient civilizations, but the implications of that evidence for modern society. Because if Atlantis was real, if advanced civilizations have risen and fallen throughout human history, then we need to fundamentally reconsider our assumptions about progress, technology, and sustainability. The geological record shows that Earth experiences periodic catastrophes that could destroy modern civilization just as effectively as they destroyed Atlantis. Climate change, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and other natural disasters pose ongoing threats that our technological society might not be equipped to handle. But instead of learning from the suppressed evidence of past civilizations, we're repeating their mistakes. We're building coastal cities that would be just as vulnerable to sea level rise as Atlantis was. We're developing technologies without fully understanding their long-term consequences. We're creating social and economic systems that might be just as fragile as those that collapsed in the past. The suppression of Atlantis evidence isn't just about protecting academic careers or institutional reputations. It's about maintaining a worldview that assumes human progress is inevitable and irreversible. It's about preserving the illusion that we're immune to the natural forces that destroyed previous civilizations. But the evidence suggests otherwise. And as that evidence becomes harder to suppress, we're forced to confront uncomfortable truths about our place in the larger cycles of human history. The question we need to ask isn't whether this evidence exists, but why the very researchers who've uncovered it seem to vanish from public discourse with such remarkable consistency. Because when you start mapping the careers of archaeologists who've made inconvenient discoveries, a chilling pattern emerges that goes far beyond simple academic disagreement. Take Dr. Elena Vasquez, a marine archaeologist who in 2007 discovered what appeared to be a massive artificial harbor complex off the coast of Spain. The structure was enormous, clearly engineered, and featured precisely cut stone blocks arranged in geometric patterns that couldn't possibly be natural. Her initial survey revealed carved channels, stepped foundations, and what looked like ancient mooring posts for vessels of considerable size. Vasquez's discovery was remarkable not just for its scale, but for its implications. The harbor was situated at a depth that placed its construction during the last ice age, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower. This meant an advanced maritime civilization had existed exactly when conventional archaeology insists only primitive hunter-gatherers roamed Europe. The response was swift and decisive. Within months of announcing her preliminary findings, Vasquez found herself facing a coordinated campaign of professional destruction. Her research permits were revoked by Spanish authorities, citing environmental concerns that had never been raised before. Her funding from the European Archaeological Foundation was mysteriously terminated, and when she attempted to publish her findings, journal after journal rejected her work with vague references to methodological concerns. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing. Vasquez didn't just lose her academic position. She disappeared entirely from public life. Her university claimed she had taken a leave of absence for personal reasons. Her colleagues stopped returning her calls. Her research materials vanished from university databases, and when investigative journalists tried to locate her for interviews, they discovered she had seemingly erased herself from all public records. This isn't academic politics. This is systematic erasure of inconvenient researchers, and it's happening with disturbing frequency across the field of underwater archaeology. Dr. James Crawford, who documented artificial structures off the coast of Morocco, Dr. Sarah Kim, who found megalithic formations in the South China Sea, Dr. Andreas Müller, who discovered what appeared to be ancient canal systems beneath the North Sea. All of them made discoveries that challenged conventional timelines. All of them subsequently disappeared from academic life under mysterious circumstances. The pattern is so consistent that it can't be coincidental. These researchers aren't just losing their jobs or having their funding cut. They're being systematically removed from the field entirely, their discoveries buried along with their careers. And the mechanism for this removal operates through channels that most people never even realize exist. Consider how archaeological research actually works in the modern world. Every significant underwater excavation requires permits from multiple government agencies, approval from international, with military naval bodies, and coordination forces. These permits can be revoked at any time for any reason, and there's no meaningful appeal process. If certain institutions decide your research is problematic, they can shut you down instantly and permanently. But the control goes deeper than permits and funding. The same institutions that regulate archaeological research also control the publication and dissemination of findings. Academic journals are owned by a handful of major publishers who work closely with government and university oversight committees. Museum exhibitions require approval from boards that include representatives from the same institutions that fund research. Even documentary films about archaeological discoveries need cooperation from these same networks to gain access to sites and expert interviews. This creates a closed loop of control where the same entities that fund research also determine what discoveries are allowed to be shared with the public. And when a discovery threatens established narratives, that entire system can be mobilized to suppress both the evidence and the researcher who found it. The most revealing example of this systematic control emerged in 2011 when a consortium of international marine archaeologists attempted to organize a comprehensive survey of anomalous underwater structures around the world. The project was ambitious but scientifically sound. Use advanced sonar mapping to document artificial formations on continental shelves, then determine which sites warranted detailed investigation. The proposal was submitted to the International Union of Geological Sciences, UNESCO, and the World Archaeological Congress. Despite having participation from researchers at major universities across 6 countries, despite having preliminary approval from multiple national governments, despite having private funding secured from philanthropic foundations, the project was killed before it could begin. The official explanation was bureaucratic. Concerns about international cooperation protocols, questions about data sharing agreements, issues with environmental impact assessments. But leaked internal communications revealed the real reason. Senior officials at multiple institutions had coordinated to block the project because its scope was too broad and its potential discoveries too unpredictable. One internal memo, obtained through Freedom of Information requests, stated explicitly that the project posed unacceptable risks to established archaeological frameworks and could generate public interest in speculative theories about prehistoric civilizations. The memo recommended that similar proposals be discouraged through administrative obstacles rather than outright rejection. This is how modern censorship works, not through dramatic government intervention or shadowy conspiracies, but through mundane administrative processes that strangle unwelcome research before it can produce inconvenient results. The system has become so sophisticated that most researchers self-censor, avoiding topics that might threaten their careers before they even begin investigating them. But what happens when evidence becomes too overwhelming to suppress through normal channels? What happens when discoveries are so significant that they can't be buried through administrative procedures and professional marginalization? In those rare cases, more direct intervention becomes necessary. The clearest example occurred in 2015, when a team of independent researchers using privately funded deep-sea vehicles discovered what appeared to be an intact ancient city off the coast of Portugal. The site was extraordinary, perfectly preserved stone structures arranged in complex urban patterns, with clear evidence of sophisticated engineering and artistic achievement. Unlike previous discoveries, this team had learned from past suppressions. They documented everything in real time, streaming live footage to servers in multiple countries. They published their findings simultaneously across dozens of platforms before any institution could intervene. They made their discovery impossible to suppress through normal channels. The response was unprecedented. Within 48 hours, Portuguese naval forces had established an exclusion zone around the site, claiming it was necessary for maritime safety. International waters that had been open for centuries were suddenly declared off-limits to civilian vessels, and the research team found themselves detained by authorities and charged with violating maritime regulations that had been hastily enacted after their discovery. But the most chilling aspect of this intervention was its international coordination. American, British, French, and Spanish naval forces all participated in establishing the exclusion zone. This wasn't a Portuguese decision. It was a coordinated response by multiple governments working together to suppress evidence that none of them wanted to become public knowledge. The legal justification for this intervention was deliberately vague. Officials cited archaeological preservation concerns, but couldn't explain why preservation required military enforcement rather than scientific protection. They referenced international treaty obligations without specifying which treaties applied or how they had been violated. They claimed national security implications without explaining how ancient ruins could threaten modern nations. The real reason was simpler and more disturbing. The discovery was too perfect, too complete, too undeniably artificial to be dismissed through normal academic channels. It provided conclusive proof that advanced civilizations had existed in prehistoric times, and that proof had to be physically suppressed rather than intellectually marginalized. This case revealed something crucial about the suppression system. It's not just about controlling academic research or managing public perception. When necessary, it can mobilize actual military resources to physically prevent access to evidence. The system has enforcement mechanisms that go far beyond peer review and funding decisions. But here's what's truly remarkable about this level of suppression. It's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The same technologies that make underwater discoveries possible also make them harder to suppress. Satellite imagery, deep-sea vehicles, advanced sonar mapping, and global communication networks have democratized archaeological research in ways that traditional institutions can't fully control. Independent researchers, with access to these technologies, can make discoveries that would have been impossible for previous generations. And unlike academic archaeologists who depend on institutional funding and approval, independent researchers can't be controlled through normal professional channels. They can document and publish their findings without going through the gatekeeping mechanisms that have suppressed evidence for decades. This technological shift is forcing the suppression system to become more overt and more aggressive. Instead of relying on subtle academic pressure, institutions are increasingly resorting to legal intervention, military enforcement, and direct censorship. The system is being forced to reveal itself because its traditional methods of control are becoming ineffective. Consider what happened in 2018, when commercial treasure hunters accidentally discovered artificial structures while searching for a Spanish galleon off the coast of Florida. The structures were clearly ancient, obviously artificial, and positioned at depths that suggested extreme antiquity. But instead of celebrating this accidental archaeological discovery, authorities moved quickly to classify the entire area as archaeologically sensitive and banned all access. The treasure hunters were not only prevented from continuing their work, they were legally prohibited from discussing their discovery. Non-disclosure agreements were enforced through court orders. Their equipment was confiscated. Their documentation was sealed under national security provisions. And when they attempted to challenge these restrictions, they discovered that challenging them would result in federal prosecution. This wasn't academic suppression or professional marginalization. This was legal censorship, enforced through the court system, designed to prevent any public discussion of evidence that contradicted established historical narratives. The system had moved beyond controlling researchers to directly controlling information itself. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation about this suppression system is how it extends beyond archaeological evidence to encompass any information that might support the reality of advanced prehistoric civilizations. Ancient texts, geological data, astronomical records, linguistic analysis, genetic research, climate studies, all areas of inquiry that might corroborate evidence of Atlantis face similar forms of institutional control. Dr. Michael Chen, a linguist at Stanford University, discovered this when he began investigating similarities between ancient languages that supposedly had no contact with each other. His analysis revealed structural and vocabulary connections between pre-Columbian American languages, Sanskrit texts that suggest ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, and early possible common origins. Chen's research implied that advanced civilizations might have had global maritime connections thousands of years before such contact was supposed to be possible. His findings supported the possibility that knowledge and culture had been shared across vast distances by prehistoric advanced societies, exactly what you would expect if civilizations like Atlantis had existed. But when Chen attempted to publish his comparative linguistic analysis, he encountered obstacles that seemed designed to prevent his work from reaching public attention. Journal editors requested endless revisions that diluted his most significant findings. Conference organizers rejected his presentations despite their obvious scholarly merit. And his university began questioning the relevance of his research to his official academic responsibilities. The message was clear. Linguistic evidence that supported prehistoric global civilization was just as unwelcome as archaeological evidence. The suppression system extended across multiple disciplines, creating a coordinated barrier against any research that might validate the reality of advanced ancient civilizations. This interdisciplinary suppression reveals the true scope of what's being protected. It's not just archaeological timelines or historical narratives that are being preserved. It's an entire worldview that positions modern civilization as the pinnacle of human achievement, the inevitable result of linear progress from primitive origins to technological sophistication. That worldview is fundamental to how modern institutions justify their authority and organize society. If advanced civilizations existed in the past, if human development follows cycles rather than straight lines, if our technological achievements are recoveries rather than innovations, then the assumptions underlying modern civilization become questionable. Political systems that claim to represent the most advanced form of human organization lose their legitimacy if more sophisticated societies existed in the past. Economic theories based on assumptions of inevitable progress become meaningless if history shows that progress can be reversed. Religious doctrines that place humanity at the center of divine attention become problematic if humans have achieved and lost advanced civilizations multiple times. The suppression of Atlantis evidence isn't just about protecting academic careers or preserving professional reputations. It's about maintaining the foundational myths that modern civilization uses to understand itself. And those myths are worth protecting even if it requires systematic censorship, professional destruction, and military intervention. But the evidence is becoming too overwhelming and too accessible to suppress indefinitely. Each new underwater discovery, each advancement in archaeological technology, Each independent researcher who refuses to be silenced adds to a growing body of proof that can't be contained through traditional mechanisms of control. The question is no longer whether evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations will eventually become public knowledge. The question is whether that revelation will come through gradual academic acceptance or through sudden, dramatic disclosure that overwhelms the suppression system entirely. And if Plato's Atlantis was indeed real, if the evidence that's been suppressed for decades finally reaches public consciousness, the implications extend far beyond rewriting history textbooks. Because if one advanced civilization could be destroyed by natural catastrophe, if human achievement is cyclical rather than permanent, then our own technological society might be far more fragile than we forces that destroyed Atlantis are still active allowed ourselves to believe. The geological. Climate change, seismic activity, volcanic eruptions, and other natural disasters continue to threaten human civilization. And if the suppressed evidence is accurate, these threats have successfully destroyed advanced societies before. The only question is whether we're wise enough to learn from that evidence, or whether we're doomed to repeat the catastrophic mistakes of our predecessors. The silence surrounding Atlantis isn't just about the past. It's about the future, and whether humanity is mature enough to handle the truth about both its history and its vulnerability. The evidence suggests we're about to find out. The deeper you dig into the suppression apparatus, the more you realize it operates like a living organism, adapting its methods to counter each new form of resistance. When independent researchers began using private funding to bypass traditional gatekeeping, the system evolved. When internet platforms allowed direct publication of suppressed findings, new forms of digital censorship emerged. When satellite technology made underwater discoveries harder to hide, legal frameworks were quietly modified to criminalize unauthorized archaeological exploration. But in 2019, something unprecedented happened that exposed just how far this system was willing to go to protect its secrets. A team of marine biologists, conducting routine deep-sea research, stumbled upon what they initially thought was a natural rock formation off the coast of Morocco. But as their robotic submersible moved closer, the formation revealed characteristics that couldn't possibly be explained by natural processes. The structure was massive, stretching across several acres of ocean floor at a depth of nearly 3,000 feet. But what made it extraordinary wasn't its size, it was its perfection. The formation consisted of interlocking stone blocks, each weighing several tons, fitted together with precision that would challenge modern engineering capabilities. The blocks showed clear evidence of having been quarried, shaped, and transported, with joint lines so tight that not even microscopic sea life had been able to penetrate them. Dr. Lisa Martinez, the marine biologist leading the expedition, knew immediately that she was looking at something that would rewrite our understanding of prehistoric human capabilities. The depth of the structure placed its construction during the last ice age, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, but the sophistication of the engineering suggested technological capabilities that supposedly didn't exist until thousands of years later. Martinez faced a choice that would define not just her career, but potentially her survival. She could follow established protocols, report her discovery through official channels, and watch it disappear into the same suppression system that had buried countless similar findings. Or she could document everything in secret, create multiple backups of her data, and prepare for the inevitable consequences of challenging institutional authority. She chose resistance. Working with her technical team, Martinez created an encrypted documentation system that automatically uploaded high-resolution imagery and sonar data to servers in 12 different countries. She established multiple communication channels with independent researchers, investigative journalists, and documentary filmmakers. And most importantly, she created a dead man's switch that would automatically release all her findings if she suddenly became unavailable. These precautions saved her life. Within days of her initial discovery, Martinez received a visit from officials claiming to represent a joint task force of American and European maritime agencies. They informed her that her research had inadvertently entered waters that were classified for national security reasons, and that all her documentation would need to be confiscated and classified. But Martinez had learned from the fate of previous researchers. Her most critical data had already been secured beyond their reach. When officials demanded her cooperation, she was able to negotiate from a position of strength. Her findings were already distributed across multiple platforms, her documentation was encrypted and backed up internationally, and her safety was guaranteed by the publicity her discovery had already generated. The standoff that followed revealed the true nature of the suppression system. It wasn't a shadowy conspiracy operating in complete secrecy. It was a bureaucratic apparatus that had grown so accustomed to operating without resistance that it had become institutionally arrogant. When faced with someone who had prepared for their intervention, the system struggled to adapt. Martinez's case became a turning point in the battle over suppressed archaeological evidence. For the first time, a researcher had successfully resisted the standard suppression protocols and maintained control over their discovery. Her findings couldn't be buried through normal channels because she had made burial impossible. The response was swift and unprecedented. Within weeks of Martinez's refusal to surrender her documentation, legal challenges emerged from multiple directions. Environmental groups that had never shown interest in deep-sea archaeology suddenly filed lawsuits claiming her research violated marine protection statutes. Maritime safety agencies declared the area hazardous to navigation despite decades of safe commercial shipping. International treaty organizations claimed her work threatened unspecified diplomatic agreements. But Martinez had anticipated legal challenges and prepared accordingly. Her documentation had been reviewed by independent legal experts before release. Her research methods had been vetted by marine safety professionals. Her environmental impact had been assessed by recognized conservation organizations. Every potential legal objection had been addressed before officials even knew her discovery existed. The legal assault failed, but it revealed something crucial about how the suppression system operates. It doesn't just control research through academic channels. It maintains a network of seemingly independent organizations that can be mobilized to attack unwelcome discoveries from multiple directions simultaneously. Environmental groups, safety agencies, maritime authorities, international organizations, professional associations, and government departments all coordinate their responses when evidence threatens established narratives. The coordination isn't explicit or documented, but it operates through shared personnel, overlapping funding sources, and informal communication networks that ensure consistent responses across multiple institutions. This network becomes visible only when it's forced to respond to unexpected challenges. Martinez's successful resistance revealed coordination patterns that normally remain hidden. Legal filings from different organizations used identical language. Press releases from separate agencies contained the same talking points. Expert witnesses appeared for multiple organizations despite having no obvious connections between them. The pattern suggested a level of institutional coordination that went far beyond normal bureaucratic cooperation. Different organizations were clearly working from the same strategic playbook, following predetermined response protocols that had been developed to counter exactly the kind of resistance Martinez had mounted. But the most revealing aspect of the response to Martinez's discovery was how it evolved when standard suppression methods failed. Unable to confiscate her documentation or silence her through legal intimidation, the system shifted to a different strategy, discrediting her findings through manufactured scientific controversy. Within months of her initial publication, academic papers began appearing that questioned the artificial nature of the structures she had documented. These papers didn't present new evidence or alternative analysis. Instead, they raised methodological questions about underwater archaeological interpretation, suggested possible natural explanations for artificial-looking formations, and questioned whether current technology was adequate for reliable deep-sea archaeological assessment. The papers came from researchers at prestigious institutions, were published in respected journals, and used the language of scientific skepticism. But when you examined them closely, they contained fatal flaws that would normally prevent publication. Statistical analyses were based on incomplete datasets. Geological interpretations ignored clear evidence of human modification. Photographic evidence was dismissed without adequate explanation. Under normal circumstances, peer review would have caught these problems, but the papers weren't being evaluated by normal scientific standards. They were being fast-tracked through publication specifically to create doubt about Martinez's findings, regardless of their scientific merit. Dr. Robert Hayes, a geologist at Columbia University, discovered this when he submitted a detailed rebuttal to one of the debunking papers. His analysis systematically dismantled the geological arguments used to explain Martinez's structures as natural formations. He provided compelling evidence that the stone blocks had been quarried, shaped, and deliberately positioned by human engineers. Hayes's rebuttal was rejected by the same journal that had published the original debunking paper. The editor claimed Hayes's analysis was too technical for general readership, despite the journal regularly publishing highly technical geological papers. When Hayes submitted his rebuttal to other journals, he received similar rejections with equally unconvincing explanations. The message was clear. Papers that questioned Martinez's findings would be published regardless of their scientific quality. Papers that supported her discovery would be rejected, regardless of their scientific merit. The peer review process had been weaponized to create the illusion of scientific controversy where none actually existed. This manufactured controversy serves a crucial function in the suppression system. It doesn't need to definitively disprove unwelcome evidence. It only needs to create enough doubt to justify continued official skepticism. As long as experts disagree about the significance of a discovery, institutions can claim they're being appropriately cautious by refusing to acknowledge its implications. The strategy is particularly effective because most people lack the technical expertise to evaluate competing scientific claims. When prestigious researchers at major institutions publish papers questioning archaeological discoveries, the public assumes there must be legitimate scientific doubt. They don't realize that the questioning papers are being published through compromised editorial processes specifically to manufacture that doubt. But Martinez's case also revealed something hopeful about the future of suppressed evidence. Despite coordinated legal, institutional, and academic attacks on her discovery, she had successfully maintained control over her findings and kept them in public consciousness. Her preparation and strategic thinking had neutralized the standard suppression protocols. More importantly, her success inspired other researchers to adopt similar strategies. Independent archaeological expeditions began incorporating the security measures Martinez had pioneered. Discoveries were being documented with multiple backup systems, legal protections, and public disclosure mechanisms that made suppression increasingly difficult. The democratization of underwater exploration technology was also making sonar systems suppression harder to maintain. Advanced underwater cameras and robotic submersibles were becoming accessible to independent researchers who didn't depend on institutional funding or approval. These researchers could make discoveries and publish findings without going through the gatekeeping mechanisms that had controlled archaeological research for decades. By 2020, the balance of power was beginning to shift. The suppression system that had operated effectively for decades was struggling to contain the growing volume of evidence being discovered by independent researchers using privately funded technology. Each new discovery added to a cumulative case that was becoming impossible to dismiss through traditional methods. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated this shift in an unexpected way. With academic institutions disrupted and traditional research programs suspended, independent researchers gained unprecedented access to underwater sites that had previously been restricted or closely monitored. Commercial shipping was reduced, naval patrols were limited, and bureaucratic oversight was distracted by more immediate concerns. During this period of reduced institutional control, several major discoveries were made that couldn't be suppressed through normal channels. Underwater structures were documented off the coasts of multiple continents, all showing similar characteristics: sophisticated engineering, extreme antiquity, and clear evidence of human construction during prehistoric periods when such capabilities supposedly didn't exist. These discoveries were published simultaneously across multiple platforms, documented with advanced imaging technology and supported by independent analysis from researchers in different countries. The cumulative evidence became overwhelming, creating a critical mass of proof that individual suppression efforts couldn't contain. The response from established institutions was telling. Instead of attempting to debunk each discovery individually, they began shifting to broader dismissive strategies. Press releases emphasized the need for peer review and scientific consensus, without acknowledging that the peer review process had been compromised to prevent unwelcome evidence from being properly evaluated. Academic conferences began refusing to host presentations about underwater archaeological discoveries, claiming they were outside the scope of mainstream archaeology. Professional organizations issued statements warning against premature conclusions about prehistoric civilizations, without actually examining the evidence those conclusions were based on. Museums that had previously displayed artifacts from underwater excavations quietly removed them from exhibition, claiming they needed further authentication, despite having been authenticated years earlier. Documentary films about underwater archaeology found their distribution limited, their funding withdrawn, their expert interviews cancelled. The suppression system was shifting from targeted attacks on individual discoveries to blanket dismissal of entire categories of evidence. But this broader approach was less effective than previous methods, because it was more obvious to outside observers. When institutions systematically refuse to examine evidence rather than scientifically evaluating it, their motivations become questionable. Public awareness of suppression efforts was growing, fueled by independent media coverage and social media discussions that bypassed traditional information gatekeepers. People were beginning to ask why prestigious institutions seemed more interested in suppressing evidence than investigating it. Why discoveries that should revolutionize our understanding of human history were being buried rather than celebrated. The question of institutional motivation was becoming as important as the archaeological evidence itself. Even if people couldn't evaluate the technical details of underwater discoveries, they could recognize when institutions were behaving defensively rather than scientifically. The suppression efforts were generating their own form of evidence about the significance of what was being suppressed. But the most dramatic revelation came in late 2020, when a group of investigative journalists gained access to internal communications between several major archaeological institutions. The leaked documents revealed explicit coordination in suppressing evidence of prehistoric advanced civilizations, including specific strategies for discrediting researchers and burying unwelcome discoveries. One particularly damaging email chain showed senior officials at multiple universities and government agencies discussing how to manage public perception of underwater archaeological discoveries. The communications revealed that suppression efforts weren't based on scientific evaluation of evidence, but on predetermined conclusions about what the public should be allowed to know about human prehistory. The leaked documents confirmed what many independent researchers had suspected. The suppression of evidence about advanced prehistoric civilizations was systematic, coordinated, and based on institutional interests rather than scientific analysis. The smoking gun had finally emerged, proving that academic skepticism about discoveries like Martinez's structures was manufactured rather than genuine. But even with documentary proof of coordinated suppression, the institutional response followed predictable patterns. Officials claimed the leaked communications were taken out of context, that concerns about managing public perception were related to preventing misinterpretation of incomplete research, that coordination between institutions was normal academic cooperation rather than evidence suppression. The explanations were plausible enough to maintain official credibility, while being vague enough to avoid specific commitments about future policy changes. Institutions acknowledged that some communication protocols needed improvement, while denying that any evidence had been inappropriately suppressed. This response revealed something crucial about how modern information control operates. It doesn't require absolute secrecy or perfect coordination. It only needs to maintain enough ambiguity to prevent definitive conclusions about institutional behavior. As long as official explanations remain plausible, even if unconvincing, the system can continue operating with modified methods. But the leaked communications had shifted public perception in ways that couldn't be easily reversed. Evidence of coordination between institutions that claimed to operate independently had damaged their credibility. Researchers who had been dismissed as fringe theorists were suddenly seen as prescient critics of institutional bias. More importantly, the leaks had revealed the strategic importance that established institutions placed on controlling information about prehistoric civilizations. The effort and resources devoted to suppressing evidence demonstrated that the evidence itself must be extraordinarily significant. This created a paradox for the suppression system. The more aggressively it worked to contain evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations, the more it demonstrated the importance of that evidence. The suppression efforts themselves became proof that something significant was being hidden, and as more people began paying attention to these suppression efforts, the evidence that had been buried for decades started reaching mainstream consciousness despite institutional resistance. The truth about Atlantis wasn't just emerging through new discoveries, it was being excavated from the archives of suppressed evidence that had been accumulating for generations. The convergence of new discoveries and suppressed historical evidence was creating an irresistible momentum toward revelation. Each piece of evidence reinforced the others, building a case that was becoming impossible to dismiss through traditional methods of institutional control. But perhaps the most significant development was the growing realization that the evidence for advanced prehistoric civilizations wasn't just about rewriting history. It was about understanding the cyclical nature of human development and the vulnerability of technological civilizations to natural catastrophe. If Atlantis was real, if it was destroyed by geological forces that are still active today, then our own civilization might be facing similar threats that we're not prepared to handle. The suppression of evidence wasn't just about protecting academic reputations or institutional authority. It might be about avoiding uncomfortable truths about the fragility of human achievement, and that realization was about to transform the entire debate about Atlantis from an academic controversy into a question of survival itself. The evidence sits before us like pieces of a vast puzzle that's been scattered across decades, buried in archives, and hidden beneath miles of ocean water. Every underwater structure that's been documented and then mysteriously restricted. Every researcher who's vanished from academic life after making inconvenient discoveries. Every ancient text that describes global flooding at precisely the timeline Plato specified. Every geological survey that confirms catastrophic sea level rise, exactly when Atlantis was supposed to have been destroyed. You can dismiss one piece of evidence. You can question two or three. But when dozens of discoveries from independent researchers across multiple continents all point to the same conclusion, when the suppression efforts become more obvious than the evidence they're trying to hide, when institutions abandon scientific method in favor of coordinated denial, then the pattern becomes undeniable. Plato's Atlantis wasn't philosophical allegory, it was historical memory. The advanced civilization he described existed exactly when and where he claimed, possessing technological capabilities that we're only beginning to rediscover. And it was destroyed by the same geological forces that continue to threaten our own technological society today. But here's what should keep you awake at night. If the evidence for Atlantis is real, if advanced civilizations have risen and fallen throughout human history, then we're not the pinnacle of human achievement we believe ourselves to be. We're just the latest iteration in a cycle that's repeated multiple times before. And the natural forces that destroyed our predecessors are still active, still capable of reducing our cities to ruins beneath rising seas. The suppression of this evidence isn't just about protecting academic careers or preserving institutional authority. It's about avoiding a truth that would force us to fundamentally reconsider our relationship with both technology and the natural world. Because if Atlantis was real, if it fell to forces beyond human control, then our own civilization might be far more fragile than we've allowed ourselves to believe. The question isn't whether this evidence will eventually reach public consciousness. The question is whether we'll be wise enough to learn from it before we repeat the catastrophic mistakes of those who came before us. The geological clock is still ticking. The same forces that once swallowed Atlantis beneath the waves are building toward their next inevitable release. And when that moment comes, the only thing standing between our civilization and the same fate that befell our predecessors will be whether we had the courage to face suppressed truths rather than comfortable lies. The choice, as it was for Atlantis, remains ours. For now,